and it is my distinct honor to invite you onto this virtual global floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashif, if I may call you that. And thank you to ADR BC for mounting this very interesting program this week, focusing on the theme of healing, of reconciliation, and post-conflict repair. My talk today is going to be on Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, grappling creatively with an uncomfortable past. I would like to highlight the principle creatively because we want to know what type of endeavors can we undertake to deal with a problem which is normally uncomfortable for any country, for any people, and for any polity. Next, please, Jan. I will give you a brief outline of the scope of this lecture. Firstly, I will speak about where on the spectrum of dispute resolution does Truth and Reconciliation Commissions fit in. It's very much on the opposite spectrum of the Nuremberg trials or the International Criminal Courts. It veers closer to the restorative justice end, where people indulge in dialogue, in discussion, and in listening. 10 slides down, if Judge Albie Sachs of South Africa is joining the Zoom, I will call on Judge Albie Sachs to give us a background on apartheid in South Africa. No other human being that I'm aware of who's alive today could speak with such authority, with such authenticity, and with such passion about what apartheid meant and the role he played in its dismantlement. If Judge Albie cannot join us due to some technological hitch, I will try second best to give you that background. Thereafter, I will briefly touch on some of the comments on Canada, because I had the good fortune yesterday of listening to the beautiful presentation that Rai Moran, who's also going to be on our panel, spoke about with a group of Canadian committed civil society activists. I will then segue in what do we mean by grappling creatively. What does creative grappling mean in today's context? I will then speak about the role of education and finally end with the power of hope. After my presentation, there's going to be a panel discussion, and after the panel discussion is over, I will come back with marshalling with the last two questions that Ashif may put to me. Next, please, Ashif. I start this presentation with a particular phrase that I use from a book by a leading Czech novelist, Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera says, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. The very purpose of listening and the very ability to allow people to speak, to me, remains at the heart of healing, at the heart of dialogue, at the heart of repair. So let us go to the next slide and look at the basic definition of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are on the spectrum of the dispute resolution scale, very much towards mediation, not towards adversariality. TRCs seek to repair social and community fabric that has been destroyed by violence. They are institutional investigations into human rights abuses, giving both the victim and the offender a chance to be heard. It's very much like victim-offender mediation. Next, please. What is their purpose? Such testimonials of listening to people are then analyzed and presented as a historical picture to help in the social recovery. And the whole thing is done through the narrative process. through truth-seeking with an aim to achieving reconciliation. Next, please. What is their history? Since 1945, since the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, trials have been the preferred response to human rights violations. TRCs were first used in Africa and Latin America, but they got discredited in the 1980s for obfuscating truth and justice, while repressive regimes continued to remain in power and victimize people further. They were becoming debased until we saw a new Truth and Reconciliation Commission emerging from the ashes of apartheid. Next, please. How did this change of image take place? It took place through the intercession or intervention of a group of people, two of whom were very leading in the process. One was Nelson Mandela, and the other one was Judge or Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Both these men were moral giants in their own way. One was the apostle of forgiveness. The other one was the moral conscience of a nation going through pain and anger. And both of them were able to play major roles in making this process what it was meant to be. Not hounding people for past abuses, but humanizing them and to make them human again in the process of the healing of a nation. Next, please. What are the general characteristics of TRCs? They focus on and investigate past abuses. They deal with past abuses. They are temporary. They are a bridge. They are not a destination. They have official sanction. They are created during political transition, and they cover a specific period of time. In South Africa, they took a particular period of time from 1960 to 1994. It was a period of about 34 years, though discrimination in South Africa goes back to 1652, and apartheid as a political ideology took root in 1948. But the TRC in South Africa took a specific period of time and took that particular point into account. Next, please, Jan. What are their core elements? Well, they deal with truth, they deal with justice, and they deal with reconciliation. These are the principles that TRCs are meant to achieve. The testimonial process gives the previously voiceless a voice as oppressed and disadvantaged people relate their experiences through their own voices. And justice is an important factor. Reconciliation is an aim. And here I would like to just bring in one little aside, that after listening to Rai Moran yesterday, speaking about the logo of the Canadian TRCs, he spoke about certain inherent principles in the indigenous communities, such as respect, humility, love for others, wisdom, honesty, courage, and truth. And he said truth is the last one, not because it doesn't matter, but truth subsumes all the other values in an interconnected moral ecosystem. In this context, I cannot help but refer to the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Daisaku Ikeda. Here, I cannot but remind you of the beautiful aphorism attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Become the change that you want to see in life." And to Martin Luther King, who said so beautifully that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think when I look at the principles informing the Canadian process, They embrace the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Dr. Daisaku Ikeda. Next, please. Who can call a TRC? Well, it varies. In South Africa, it was called for by the government that was out of commission and the new government that had come into place. In El Salvador, it was called by the United Nations. In Sierra Leone, it was called for by a peace agreement. In Argentina, it was by a presidential decree. In Sri Lanka, it was by the NGOs. In Brazil, it was by the Catholic Church. So there is no one size fits all, but Truth and Reconciliation Commissions normally adjust themselves to the cultures of the countries in which they are operating. Next, please. These Truth and Reconciliations are not a silver bullet, as you will see in the discussion today. They are a bridge between the pain of the past and the hope of the future. I use those words very advisedly. The pain of the past and the hope of the future. These TRCs cannot work in isolation. They are a portal to more definitive action. They have to be used in tandem with other processes of addressing human conflict. They cannot work in isolation. And we often hear the commonly addressed criticism, what do you do with the Truth and Reconciliation? You cannot eat reconciliation. When we hear remarks of that nature, it then shows us that we need to do more to bring about some sort of a healing process through definitive social action and through a change of a mindset to bring about a just and equitable social order. I think that Judge Albie Sachs is with us already, and I believe he's going to be with us in this session. I would just like to say a few words of welcome. Albie, if I may, Judge Sachs, what a wonderful opportunity to have you with us. I can think of no other person living today who could speak with such authenticity about the past pain of apartheid, something you encountered as a young political activist, where you acted as a human rights lawyer. You yourself were a political detainee. You were a victim of the bomb attack of somebody who wanted to destroy your life. You picked up your life by the bootstraps. You worked on the new constitution of South Africa, ensuring that there was peace, there was equity, there was love, and there was understanding. And finally, you became a judge of the new constitutional court, whose building and whose artwork you worked towards putting together. I do not want to take the wind out of your sails, except to say, we welcome you with open arms. We thank you for being with us today, and we want to hear you speak from the soul, as you so often do, Judge Albie Sachs. You speak to the human predicament from the soul, not from the mind alone. Now the floor is all yours. Please speak to us.
Well, thank you, Mohamed. Thank you to everybody in, I think it's 3 continents. It's quite extraordinary. And in a sense, it's very appropriate for a truth commission, because truth is truth is truth is truth. And the problems of discovering the truth and coming up with the truth and bearing the truth, I think really are universal and absolutely interconnected. My engagement, in fact, with our Truth Commission in South Africa was threefold. First of all, as an activist, a member of the National Executive of the ANC. We still living under the apartheid government, and we're having a passionate debate. The Motsunyane Commission has reported to the ANC, having been asked to do so by the leadership, on violations of human rights committed by the ANC itself, not the regime, not apartheid, but by our own people with captured enemy agents using torture. And we felt we can't come into a new South Africa with our own gross failures unexamined and undealt with. And what should we do? And the Commission says there's prima facie evidence that you use torture in the camps. You must hold those responsible accountable for what they've done. And some people are saying, well, terrible circumstances, the times and all the rest. And in the end, we decide, and I passionately argued in favor of holding people to account, we decided when we get democracy in South Africa, we will have a truth commission, not just of our crimes, but of the crimes of the regime over centuries. That would bring in more balance. And it would be done not just by a political party, but by the government. So ironically, our Truth Commission came from the liberation movement itself, wanting to own up to its own failures. And that across-the-board character of a Truth Commission, I think, is very, very important. A second element that was very specific was at one stage, before we got our general elections, the generals were saying, we see that we're going to be sent to jail for crimes committed by the apartheid government when democracy comes, and we're not going to upset the elections that are coming, we're just going to disappear. And the ANC is worried about that, and I remember writing on the back of a telex, we can't grant them a general amnesty, we can only say we'll have a truth commission, they must come forward one by one. So our Truth Commission was very much sprouted by our particular circumstances, failures of the liberation movement that had to be acknowledged, and finding a way of compelling the generals to own up to what they'd done without necessarily provoking a crisis and civil war in the country. The next time I'm involved is when the Truth Commission is being created, and I say I'm supporting it very, very strongly. Well, you've got to hear evidence. In private, people won't speak out. And civil society jumped on me, and fortunately I wasn't listened to, because the strength of our Truth Commission, and this is absolutely vital, was public hearings involving the public, seeing the tears, hearing the lamentations. And I developed a notion of 4 kinds of truth. There's scientific, evidential truth, based on observation. There's logical truth based on the inherent logic of particular proposition. And most legal work is based on evidential proof and logical truth. But there's also experiential truth, which Gandhi spoke so much about. That's the truth as of the lives as experienced of people, the phenomenological aspect. And finally, there's dialogical truth. And the strength of our Truth Commission came from the 3rd and the 4th kinds of truth, the experiential and the dialogical, the multiple dimensions of truth. So if a Truth Commission simply ends up with a report, however damning it might be, it's failed. It's the proceedings of the Commission itself must enter into the soul of the nation. People must respond to it. As one writer put it, it must convert knowledge into acknowledgement. We know these terrible things happened. Acknowledgement comes when you say, where was I? What were we doing? How can we prevent this from happening? You have to connect with your heart and soul with the episodes that are being described. The other important aspect of a Truth Commission is it excludes denialism. It's not this political person, that party is saying it. It's the commission that's founded. It absolutely has to have people at the head of the commission who are not neutral. You can't be neutral in the face of torture, ill treatment, but you can be impartial. They must be impartial. That people with soul and with spirit, but who listen to everybody, give everybody a hearing. My final contact with the Truth Commission was meeting the man who placed the bomb in my car through the Truth Commission. It was extraordinary for me. I ended up shaking his hand. I nearly fainted. He went home, I believe, afterwards and cried for 2 weeks. I don't know if it's true. I want to believe it's true. I'd rather believe it's true than follow up and find out it's not true. But that's all part of the experiential side of a Truth Commission. And I only hope that the Canadian Commission then doesn't become a lawyerly like set of proceedings, very solemnly conducted, collecting a lot of evidence. It's got to have emotion. It's got to have soul. It's got to have the human heart and spirit and sensibility involved all the way through. And then it will be successful. Then people will remember it. They will write operas about it. They'll speak about it. They'll be touched in their souls by a commission that works with its own soul.
Albie, can you tell us exactly how you felt when you saw your assailant? How did you lead up to that? And today, what do you feel about what you did?
Well, he told me, I got a message. He was coming up to the judges, to the court, to say he's going to the Truth Commission. Will I see him? And I said yes. And I remember my heart beating as I went to the security call. This is the man who organized the bomb that had blown off my arm and taken the sight of one eye. But he had the courage to say he's going to the Truth Commission. He'll own up to what he'd done. And I opened the door and I saw, this is the man who tried to kill me. And in his eyes, it's the man I tried to kill. And then we started speaking. And I said at the end of a long discussion, I can't shake your hand. And he saw it. I had a stump where I had a hand before, but that wasn't the reason. I said, go to the Truth Commission. Maybe one day we'll meet and maybe I can shake your hand then. And then I forgot about him. And months later, I'm at a party and I hear him calling out my name. And I look at him and he's beaming. And he says, I went to the Truth Commission. I spoke to Bobby and Farouk and Sue. I told them everything and I put out my hand. I shook his hand. I almost fainted. He went away beaming and I heard he went home to cry. So my connection with the Truth Commission then was conceptually fighting for it, helping, being overcome in saying it should be in secrets of the society, repudiated my approach, thankfully, and finally, through the Truth Commission, meeting the man who organized the bomb in my car. I felt liberated by that meeting. I felt it's not some abstract, blind, horrible, threatening force out there trying to get me. It's a human being like me, and we're now living in the same country.
I think that's absolutely wonderful, Albie. Albie, are you finished with your segment so that I can move on to looking at the particularities of the TRC of South Africa?
Yes, and can I just say to the listeners, it's wonderful hearing Mohamed providing that calm reflection on what's happening, well-informed, and insisting that each Truth Commission has its own particularities, its own style, its own personalities, its own significance, but they all have this one thing in common, and that's that the connection, if you like, between your heart, between love, the law, humanity, and I say truth is love, and truth comes out between the interaction between truth and love, then you get justice. It's very different from the justice that's simply punitive. And I hope you spend a lot of time on reparations, because reparations have become identified with money. And I think once money comes into the scene as the dominant form of reparations, you're lost. You're putting into the market aspects that are very sentimental, very emotional, and you're allowing people who've done bad things to buy their way out. Money, what you need in terms of reparation is owning up, accepting responsibility, finding proactive ways of, if you like, loving your neighbor and even loving your enemy. And for me, that should be the heart of the whole process, not just getting facts and not just denunciation and not just saying how terrible, but saying what can we do to connect up. We as human beings, we all want to live in a decent society. We all want to live by decent values. And if horrible things have been done, we own up to them and we find appropriate human ways and humane ways of responding. Not just words and not just money, but that thing in between words and money, that's humanity.
Albie, thank you so very much. Your presence today gives real life to to this whole discussion because you've seen it all. And the way you say it, Albie, you inspire not only your country, you inspire the world with your example. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with us today. Jen, will we go to the next slide, which talks about the 1994 multi-party democracy and Desmond Tutu's process, please? Lovely. So in 1995, after multi-party democracy, we found the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa being instituted, and with its extension, it went up to 7 years with its final report. I will only quote two things that Desmond Tutu said, and there is this beautiful book of his called No Future Without Forgiveness. I would strongly recommend this is a book to read. I've read it about 3 or 4 times, and I can assure you there are times when I've been alone reading the book and crying because it speaks about a human condition. I can only quote Archbishop Tutu and 2 immortal phrases that he used in his interviews. It may be initially painful to open up a wound, but then it can be cleaned out and cauterized, and you can pour a healing balm. And at another case, he said, having looked the beast of the past in the eye, having asked and received forgiveness, and having made amends, let us shut the door on the past, not in order to forget it, but in order not to allow it to imprison us. And here I remember what Nelson Mandela said when he got out of his cell. His beautiful words, he said, I looked into my cell, I looked at the floor, and I said to myself, they will release me, but I don't want my soul to remain in that cell. And he said, only when I was able to forgive, I was able to extricate myself from my cell. And I think this was the spirit that informed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Next slide, please. What was the experience? I think the TRC showed South Africa's tremendous ability and capacity to forgive. It was not easy. There were moments of great tension, of pain, of anguish. Not everybody could forgive. Some were dismissive. Others were arrogant. A former president of South Africa said, it's a circus, and didn't turn up. The Prime Minister at the time, who had played a major role in bringing about the transition, could not apologize. His apology was read 27 years later after he died. So these were some of the basic principles, problems. But despite its limitations, the TRC in South Africa showed that a country that was deeply wounded, deeply divided, could find a way forward. Leading figures of the TRC processes were Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Amit Kathrada, Walter Sisulu, Albie Sachs, and many others, too many to name, who claimed that they were involved in the process of rehumanizing South African society. The book has some wonderful examples of pain, of redemption, and of forgiveness. There was one little black girl who came to the commission. Her father was taken away and killed. She said, just tell us what happened to him and tell us who did it so we can forgive that person. We want to forgive you so we can go forward. It is those type of moments across the color divide where people were able to put an end to the past and were able to forgive. There are beautiful examples of the rehumanizing process. There were times when Archbishop Tutu would cry before he started the process. There were people who spoke of pain, of anguish, and some of the examples that Truth and Reconciliation heard were of some of the most brutal examples in history's anthology of death, where people could see a body burning while they were having a barbecue. What type of humans does God create would go to this level of depredation vis-a-vis their fellow human beings? But yet Archbishop Tutu said, we do not believe a human being is inherently evil. We believe in the angel in every human being. Let us come to terms with the human predicament. South Africa was able to embrace the concept of Ubuntu, which says very eloquently that I am me because of you. If I dehumanize you, I am dehumanizing myself. If I rehumanize you, I am rehumanizing myself. We are we because of we. That, in principle, is the notion of Ubuntu that was able to make a country go beyond the anger and the hatred of the past. Next one, please. I will spend very brief moments on just commenting on the Canada TRC after having heard Rai Moran quite a few times in the past on his podcasts, but also yesterday. Some of the themes I picked up are, how do you give a voice to the survivors? Canada has acknowledged the Canadian experience of Indigenous schools as constituting cultural genocide. You have preserved the edifices of abuse and you repurposed them for teaching purposes. This is a very positive dimension. But there is a need for inclusivity. What is the role of education in this process? And as Judge Albie Sachs says, answer and address the questions of reparation. Look at the systemic inequities in our society that we need to address to become human again. What are the positive actions we need to take? Do we juridify the process and go back to the courts and fall back on our rights? Or do we give alternative dispute resolution a chance to operate? What is actually called for today is what we need to address. Next slide, please. The core element of my presentation is creating creative grappling. Here we need to ask, what is the role of the humanities and the arts? And hopefully in our discussion we will be addressing that, because both Rai Moran in the TRC Center and Albie Sachs in the construction and the architecture of the Constitutional Court looked at art, looked at symbolism of how people make meaning. What is the role of social justice and positive actions? What do we need to do? How do you bandage the wound, to use a phrase of the Aga Khan, where conflict creates pain? What shape does bandaging the wound take in a real life situation? How do we look at affirmative action? Do we look at it as punitive or as distributive? What role does apology play in the whole mediatory process? And what does remedial action mean? It doesn't mean paying in money, as Judge Albie Sachs says, but to quote Belle Ribeiro Eddy, a member of parliament for Streatham here in England, she says, we can be more conscious about fair trade. Let us give back what does not belong to us. Let us renegotiate or forgive a debt that is inequitable. These are positive actions that we can take in today's global discourse, than to sit back and say, I'm okay, it's got nothing to do with me. I don't think we can say it's got nothing to do with me. It calls for a commitment by each one of us. And that's where I speak about creation, option, formations. There are many for those of us who care that we do not want to be part of a systemic, unjust ecosystem in which today we are languishing. Next, please. Here I come to the role of education. We can easily go and fight that we do not want our children to be burdened with this education. But how do we grapple with the past? How do we convey the notion that present freedoms are the direct result of the struggle against past injustices? How do we negotiate contested histories in the public space? Statues, street names, institution names. How are we going to negotiate the discourse in the years to come? Do we follow the lead of contemporary academics such as David Olusoga of Britain and Afua Hurst, who have spoken about lest we forget? What type of education do we want to impart? What about the literature of people like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Elif Shafak of Turkey, Amitav Ghosh of India, Arundhati Roy, George Monbiot? These are the international discourses that are taking place today, addressing global injustices such as climate injustice, gender injustice, economic injustice, injustices to people because of the color of their skin, because of their theological belief, because of their professions, because of where they are in life. We cannot deny this. We are also seeing calls for slavery reparations and the enduring fury of the Windrush scandal, followed by the visit of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge across Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. These are real issues. They will fester unless we have a framework in which to address them. And education is a very critical issue. I will leave you with one little question. Do we burden our children with the albatross of ignorance, or do we empower them with the torch of knowledge as a segue to wisdom? Next slide, please. What about the notion of hope? Is there hope in a dystopic world? Do we see just a bleak cloud on the horizon, or do we see great hope for the future? If our animosities are born out of fear, said the Aga Khan, then confident generosity is born out of hope. One of the central lessons I have learned after half century of working in the developing world is that the replacement of fear by hope is probably the single most trampoline of progress. I think here, as we'll discuss later on, we'll look at the role of pluralism and the celebration of diversity. We will also talk about what role does a cosmopolitan ethic play in our relations in building on the injustices of the past to create an equitable future for all our society. I would like to end with the last slide, where I'm going to say that Canada is an example of showing the way forward. Those maple leaves deliberately are leaves. They are fluttering in the air. They will sprout seeds, hopefully. They will show us in Canada, as well as in other countries of the world, a way forward. Canada is a country during whose history some unacceptable human rights abuses have taken place. But Canada today is ready to embrace pluralism as a cultural process in which diversity is celebrated and historic abuses are recognized. It houses the Global Center of Pluralism. Canada appears ready to take on board the emerging sensibilities about forms of injustice, as I mentioned, gender, religious, ethnic, climate, and others. This can all happen through dialogue and the process of humanization in our conflict relations. The alternative is juridification of mediation and the re-inviting of adversariality. And if I may, as a global exponent of mediation, make the humble plea, let us give mediation a chance. Let it blossom and let it deliver the promise that it has always stood for, rather than being a sad mimic of an adversarial system that sadly is not serving humanity the way it should. I would only like to make the point that I am a lawyer, trained in 3 jurisdictions of the world. I do respect law. I do see law as an important agent of change, but I see mediation operating in the shadow of the law. It should not be the point of first reference for human problems. And wherever it can be used, we need to give it a chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Keshavjee, for that inspirational keynote address this morning. And thank you for sharing with us the history of TRCs and the most famous TRC set up in South Africa, which assisted in the non-violent transition to a multi-party democracy, to the characteristics of TRC and the fact that not one model fits all and that they're adaptable to different circumstances. You also spoke of the core elements of TRCs being truth, justice, and reconciliation. The enormous capacity of forgiveness. In the Canadian realm, you talked about the themes of giving voice to the survivor, to inclusivity, role of education. You left us with the notion of hope and the role of pluralism. Canada certainly has the opportunity to show the way forward, and as you said, this can all happen through dialogue and the process of humanization in our conflict relations. Judge Sachs was inspirational in sharing his personal journey, and you know, the one quote that stands out from his words in the past are, "Words from the heart reach the heart." So thank you again, Dr. Keshavjee, and I know you're back on after we hear from our very 3 distinguished persons who have, in their own right, been an integral fabric of our civil society.